Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Bradley Hallman. Glad to have you guys back. This is actually the second part of a two-part series. The first part I've already dropped on my channel, so if you guys want to go back and watch, you're more than welcome to. If you want to just hang on and kind of see what you think about this. This little series is something I've done before and different times of the year for seasonal pattern breakdowns on how to break a lake down quickly from home to eliminate 90% of the water before you even go fishing. And to be able to do this with tools that we have, whether you're using your laptop, your computer, your cell phone, or an iPad from home, or perhaps just driving down the lake with your buddy, you're doing it from the boat or in the truck on the way to the lake. So these are just using seasonal patterns of bass movement at certain times of year on certain types of bodies of lakes that you can use across the country. This particular one happens to be on a highland reservoir. The highland reservoir that I'm using for an example is Harry S. Truman Lake in Missouri. It's a great fishery. It's got some things that are a little bit different about it. We're going to get into it. The first part was done for the lower end of the lake. I just did the bottom third. This breakdown today is going to be for the middle section and the upper end, which quite frankly, I've said in the past episodes, I've never been to this lake before in my entire life. So a lot of this is just my knowledge of traveling the country for the last 15 years and fishing different reservoirs all over the United States and taking seasonal pattern movements with certain types of lakes and using them as we jump from lake to lake to lake. So I'm showing you kind of how I do some of this and the tools that I use to get there. So if you guys would like, we're going to go from there to here, and then we're going to break this down. So here is Harry S. Truman. This is it on Google Earth. Like I said yesterday in the last episode, I guess, in episode 1, you guys are going to see that I basically broke down the lower part of this lake. And I'm just doing pieces, right? I mean, we can't do this. This is a 55,000 acre lake, so I can't do the whole thing at once. But let's just start right here in this bend, calling this the midsection. I think that we started somewhere around this bridge and then going up lake. This is the Osage arm. I'm using this just as a primary example because it is the main feeder to this lake. I will jump over and do some little bit of work here in the Grand as well because there's some water in there that's really, really good looking. One of the things that stands out to me that I want you guys to notice that's really different, I didn't point it out in the last video, is from Google Earth alone, do you see all this right here? Do you see anything different? For a highland reservoir, this is very abnormal. This is more what you see around Grand Lake, Kentucky Lake. This is not a highland reservoir type terrain that surrounds this system. Inside the river basin, 100% highland reservoir. Look, narrow turns, river turns, lots of little bitty pockets and valleys that run up inside of it. I mean, this is just like a Lake Cumberland, a Beaver Lake. Very much a highland reservoir, but yet, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Right here, just down lake that this lake dumps into is actually Lake of the Ozarks, another highland reservoir. But I want you to notice the land around it. See how it's all mountainous, valleys all around? It's also very clear. See the watercolor in comparison to this highland reservoir, which this is a highland reservoir, but just outside of that area is farmland where it's flat. And that's where you're getting this watercolor and this drainage from that gives this lake the watercolor that it has, that really separates it from the difference between this and what you see at most highland reservoirs, clear water. So it's going to create these fish to live shallower and shallower and shallower on this reservoir. This lake also has a tremendous amount of trees in it, standing timber, which rot and fall over, create more log jams up in the river system. So we're going to get into some of that, look at some of those. But for right now, that's just what I noticed on Google Earth. Big picture looking in, and it's always good to take big picture looking in at any place that you're going fishing, whether it's a pond, a small lake, or a giant reservoir. So let's start at this bridge right here, and let's just move down this lake. From the just looking at it from Google Earth, looking at offshore stuff, this is not the middle part of the lake. This is the upper third of the lake. So we're going to go from this bridge down. So let's work from bridge to bridge. Yeah, this is better, because I know that this area right here has some good looking water once we get to the Navionics. Here we have a bunch of pockets. You're seeing all these pockets would be great spawning coves. The larger the coves, the larger the population of bass potentially could be in and around those pockets. More spawning habitat. Lots of flats out here in the main river. So we're doing summertime fishing. So this is going to be an area that we're going to look at and possibly spend some time with, and that gets us to that first bridge. quite honestly, with Google Earth, until I start getting dialed in with exactly what I want whenever we're talking about summertime fishing, it's going to be hard to use Google Earth to be that effective. But here, just a second, I'm going to show you. We're going to jump over to the Navionics. Let's see here. I've got the Navionics app already pulled up here. We're going to start with this. All right. So you guys will notice that this is Harry S. Truman. Let's start at that bridge that we talked about. Let's see if this map even shows that bridge. Here's the first bridge, and there's the second bridge. Yes. So some of the areas that I was showing you around that bridge were these areas here. These are offshore islands and humps. The depths of these at 3 feet are going to be players. They're going to allow you to play even with stained water situations. So the main thing that I'm looking for in the summer is I want to stay on this main river vein. We talked about that in the last video. And then I'm looking for things on this main river vein that jump up to flats that come and have the vertical drop. So basically I'm looking for hard spot current, rock, places that are around that flow. Even though this is a reservoir, they generate. They have generators on this system, and so we do have some form of current during the summertime, especially when all the air conditioners are running, because that's when they can sell the most electricity. So they're going to turn those turbines. Same thing here. We have offshore shoals. We have some secondary points that are really good going back in. Coming up to this bridge and leaving. Usually I'm looking for a bottleneck of some type of, but this all appears to be pretty deep. Right there at that spot. There may be some riprap or something right up on the bank. Here you have a channel swing. We talked about this on any Highland reservoirs. Channel swings where they come up against the bank, where they enter up against the bank, and where they leave the bank are critical places. So here we have it coming into the bank, and then here we have it exiting the bank. So the 100 yards or so leading up to both those places, or 200 yards, can be quite successful and hold quite a few fish. Anytime we get a channel swing on a Highland reservoir, and there's many of them and they're overlooked, and you can do nothing but run them because there are so many on most Highland reservoirs. Following this on up, here once again we end up with a big flat area. This is the one that we saw on Google Earth a minute ago. Depending on water levels and stuff, and these flats are going to hold fish in the summertime because it allows the current to flow across the tops of these. While this is not directly related to the river channel, we are becoming further and further up the Osage arm, and I would imagine that the farther we go up, the more stained the water becomes, and the more stained the water becomes, the more comfortable these fish are going to feel sitting up on top of some of these shallow flats. These shallow flats are also going to be really good at catching a lot of lay down timber as it comes down during floods. And then as the water recedes, it will make big giant piles of tree limbs. A lot of them are just broken off trees from the trees that were left over from 1970 whenever they dammed the lake. So as those trees die, they tend to rot, fall over into the water, and then they create giant floating log jams that tend to get caught up on these big flats up in the river sections of these Highland reservoirs. Coming on up, this is a really good looking bay right here. Just the fact that the size of this bay being so big is interesting to me. You have a roadbed that comes across, another roadbed on there in the shallow parts, but this is one that I would go back and look at in Google Earth, no doubt, because you should have a good population of fish that are able to spawn in these 3 fingers in the springtime, which means that they would need somewhere to live in the summer, and I would imagine that this area out here has lots of that potential. That right there looks very good to me, if it's not too deep, depending on watercolor, that 15 feet. If this becomes a thing where the water's just really stained up here and they just won't get out that far, then you're going to be right up against the bank in some of these places and on some of these flatter areas, such as this right here, that they're going to use in the summer. If the water is conducive and has watercolor to it, 14, 15 feet is no big deal for a bass. And for a bass to live out here with this main channel vein blowing on this side, with the secondary blowing up against this side, if there's trees or things and such, and that's what a lot of the summer patterns here I've heard about in the past and years ago, and it's been many years ago, and I don't know how true it was or what, but guys talked about flipping the big worm in the summertime on Truman. And I got into trees and all that in the last episode, and this is what I was going to show you, is the difference with standing timber, and this would be a great example of a place that would be for what I want to talk about. In the first episode, I told you guys that I was going to explain to you the difference between cover and structure, and how important that was. And the reason that we're going to get into this is lakes that have standing timber all throughout them can become very confusing. So if you have fished a lake or a reservoir that has a lot of standing timber, whether you're in Lake Fork in Texas or Lake Truman, the one thing that they all have in common is that they look like there would be fish everywhere. But the truth is there's not fish everywhere. And the easiest way to eliminate a lot of that water and get right to it is to think of the difference of cover and structure. A tree, a laydown, is cover. A rock, grass beds are cover. Those types of things that lay upon structure. Structure is a point, a creek channel, a dam, a roadbed. Structures are things usually related to depth changes, abrupt depth changes, or just depth changes in general quickly. Those are generally structure-related situations. Structure in bass fishing in general, and I know this sounds crazy, but think about it, it's true. Structure is more important than cover. So guys are like, well, hydrilla is the most important thing. No, it's not. There's hydrilla throughout the lake. There's trees throughout the lake. The trees are not what's important. The structure that the trees sit upon is what makes them important. So this is a big key. Trees sitting out here across this flat, even though it's 17 feet, and they're not going to have bass. You can go flip all these trees you want, and you're not going to be successful. The tree that sits right on the edge of the break of this point right here, sitting right on the end, is a successful tree. What makes it? That's where you get bit. That tree wasn't a great tree because, well, it was the giant. It was the biggest oak tree in the field. No. It was successful because it's right next to the highway that the fish use to migrate their seasonal patterns, and it's right off of the exit. It's the McDonald's on I-40. That's why it was successful, because it was an ambush point of cover for them to relate to that set upon the structure which they are using to travel and migrate. So this is a big, big deal, guys. So I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. The difference between cover and structure, and the fact that structure is more important in the sport of bass fishing and seasonal movements of bass than the cover itself is. If this was not Truman Lake, if this was Kentucky Lake and it had current, this would be the point that they would be on. Although it is the down current side, usually with TVA, we like the current blowing on it. If this was Sam Rayburn, this would have hydrilla growing up on it. It would be the sweet spot. No doubt, this point. If this was on Grand Lake and there was nothing but rocks, this would still be the sweet point. You see the difference? So like no matter where we are, whether we're talking about trees, rock, or grass, this is still the sweet spot. It doesn't change. Or if it's just current, this is still the sweet spot. It doesn't change. So that is the things that relate, whether it's on a highland reservoir. If we're a highland reservoir, this is the sweet spot. If we're on a lowland reservoir, this is the sweet spot. If we're on a midland, this is the sweet spot. So these are the things that you need to understand and learn to seasonal pattern movements of bass, and when they're going to use certain things in the sweet spots. Are a bass is a bass is a bass is a bass. He doesn't change whether he lives in South Carolina or he lives in New York. Now these are just on usually man-made reservoirs and river systems. So we have situations like this. I know you guys on natural lakes don't have this, but you do have some islands and different things that we can get into whenever I do a natural lake up north with covering smallmouth and largemouth and some of their seasonal patterns up there. And I know I've had some emails and some stuff there. You guys are wanting me to get into those, and I will. I will tell you up front that I am definitely a southern guy. And these are definitely the type of impoundments that I've learned to bass fish on, so my knowledge of these is more. Now, while I've never been on Harry S. Truman, this should be a really good spot because see all these lines that you have tied up against here. The one thing that will hold us back from this is the depth. And the depth could be too deep if the water color stays too dingy and the bass just don't use that depth. And I can't tell that until I fish a reservoir. I could tell you within one day, probably, of being there. I could probably tell you just from dumping my boat. But looking at it on Google Earth, it appears that 14, 15 feet would be shallow enough to catch a bass on this reservoir offshore with it being a highland reservoir. But like I say, like I showed you all those pastures and cow fields on the other side, becomes a different deal. So after we come past this bridge, this is when things really change. I would call this the top 1/3 of this lake. Before we get to the 1/3, let's go over here to, we got time. Let's go over here to the Grand Arm and just look at why I think that, and this is why I think both sides of the mid lake of this sections of both these arms is the best part of this lake. For bass population to flourish and be good, they need all elements of the ecosystem around them for year-long success. And one of the things that's really important, even though we are talking about summer bass fishing and we're staying on the main river and close to current, without good spawning areas in the spring for the bass to flourish and have a good spawn with a high success survival rate, you have to have good spawning areas in the area. So like the place that I showed you in video 1 about the dam, how great that place looks. There wasn't many places for them to spawn. That's a problem. So therefore that cuts down on the population that's capable and able to live there because there's nowhere for them to spawn, or very few places. And look guys, the dam, the face of a dam is not conducive to spawning. That's why there's more bass that live in one cove of Sam Rayburn than live in half of the lake at Table Rock, because the cover is more conducive for spawning in some of those bays, and then with all that grass. So I don't want to get way off here, but my point being is that you have to have all elements, and that's what makes certain areas of lakes, reservoirs, and rivers more successful or better than others, is because they have a higher population of bass, because they're capable of holding that, because they have good spawning areas, good places to summer, and good places to winter. Those are the three things that they need. So with that being said, the midsection of Harry S. Truman is that. Look at all these pockets and bays. Everywhere that you see this blue, but whether it be behind islands, whether it be in the backs of pockets, whether it be down the side of the river, these bass have lots of places to spawn. They also have lots of places to summer. See this out here in the middle, we're talking 10, 11 feet, not deep, lots of cover, structure with road beds, lots of areas, nooks, crannies, lots of channel swings, places where the water comes up against the bank and away from the bank. This area particularly right here is a place that I know, a place on Table Rock that is identical to this, that multiple tournaments are won off of every daggone year. Looks just like this thing. Looks just like it on a map. Channel swings up against islands, once again with cuts and coves. I mean, this Grand Arm has the things in it to hold giant populations of fish. Lots of spawning areas, lots of cover, lots of structure, and then lots of current in the summer. So it has all the things, places in the winter for these fish to get. You know, they obviously, with it being a Highland style reservoir, there's plenty of deep vertical places for these fish to sit. Like I say, the one thing that changes Truman, that really gives it the wild card, is the watercolor. And I'll be real honest with you, where I'm from, I'm all about the watercolor. If it allows me to get on the bank in July and throw a spinnerbait because I've got a little bit of flow, I'm going to do it. But I would imagine that it still has quite a bit of Highland Reservoir characteristics to it, and these fish still get offshore even though it's not deep in comparison to its neighboring lake, Lake of the Ozark, or down south of it, Table Rock. As we get past, we're coming back over here to the I went blank again. I did this yesterday, the last video. This arm over here, I don't know why I keep forgetting the name of it, but I do, and I get it. This is the upper end of the Osage, no doubt, once you get past this bridge. And the reason why is then we'll go back to Google Earth in a second, but when you see this river channel bend right here, you're going to start seeing some giant mud flats and things start showing up. All this is silted in. There's actually giant trees growing here. This is actually a river run system that is becoming silted, and through time the populations of fish that can live up here decrease. So if you were to talk to people that had fished here 30 years ago, they're going to tell you about great places way up there that now either don't exist, silted in, covered up, different things, or there could still be some places up here that you could potentially get bit. It's hard to tell from looking at Google Earth. It's something you'd have to put a boat in and do. This is not where the largest majority of fish are going to live on this system, but it could be where tournaments are won either early in the spring or late in the fall. This could be a tournament winner. It would be more likely to be tournament winners in multi-day events than it would be in a single one-day team tournament, because, like we said, the better populations of fish are just going to live down the lake, and then that's where they're going to be. Up in these sections of a highland reservoir that is starting to silt like this one is. And let's just go ahead and go to let's go back to Google Earth. Let's pull Google Earth back up. Let me hit record here so we can get this thing going. But this is about it. As we come up here, see, look, you can see the mud flat that's sitting right here. I'm going to change the date on this because I know that it's another time when the water was shallower. There, yeah, come on. Here we go. So in this picture, you can see the mud flat out here on the inside of that river bend, and you can see the trees growing out here in the river. So as we go further up, you're going to notice what happens is there's less places for these fish to live, less places for these fish to summer, winter, and spawn as the siltation becomes more and more. And each year it will get worse and worse, and each decade it decrease drastically. I can just tell you from looking at this map, at one time, all these roadbeds and stuff in this area is back in here, they flourished. They were dynamite. When this lake was first flooded, I'm sure that it was one of the best places on the lake. But this is kind of the story that follows behind a lot of lakes just like this all across the United States, Midland, Highland, and Lowland. They all have areas such as this that are slowly decreasing, but they can still be extremely successful and still have some really good fishing on them. So, I mean, look, we're way up here, and you know, we're looking at a rock bank all the way down. I mean, there's no doubt there's been fish caught off of this at some time or another. And then we get into some of the log jams that I was telling you guys about that'll be isolated. See this log jam right here? It's very productive looking water, but it is isolated stuff that you need to be the first guy to or second guy to. But anyway, those are just a few of the things that I wanted to go over with you guys. That's the upper system and the middle section, the upper section and the middle section of Harry S. Truman. You can take all these things that I'm talking about in this video and relate them to lakes in your area. Like I said, most of this country is made up of the Midland type style lakes, and a lot of Midland style lakes have a highland section to them, or parts of that lake resemble those, and you can use some of these same characteristics. You can also use them on, you know, just like I showed you, a bass is a bass is a bass. You can relate them to a lot of different things. So the number one thing that I want you guys to remember is flow. I want to stay on that river channel. Whether I'm on a dammed up reservoir that does or doesn't use current or doesn't generate, I still want next or close to that river channel. I just feel like I've had my most success if my boat has stayed somewhere near that ditch as I travel up and down that lake. If I'm in a big giant secondary arm, then I still want to stay close to that ditch. Like I say, with highland reservoirs, it's much easier to do than if you're in a lowland reservoir. I get it. I understand the lowland, it changes, and we can go over that in another video. But with the highland and the midland lakes, it's a pattern that I try to run, and it is successful, and it does tend to have some of the biggest fish, some of the biggest bites will come right next to that river channel. You'd be amazed. So until next time, guys, don't forget to leave the feedback for me. I try to answer every question you leave. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't hit it yet. Go back and watch video 1 if you haven't seen that. Until next time, I'm out of here.
Thank you.